Welcome to Food in the Capital Webbites, a series of short information grabs where we get the opportunity to talk to foremost experts in food from across Australia and across the world. Today, it is my great pleasure to welcome Dr. Nick Rose, Churchill Fellow, scientist, writer, co-founder of the Food Sovereignty Alliance, and Executive Director of Sustain, the Australian Food Network. Thank you so much for joining us today, Nick.
It's a great pleasure, Suzanne. Lovely to be with you.
Nick, when the pandemic hit, we had a rush not only on toilet paper, but also on seedlings and all things garden related. For many Australians, it was the first time that food scarcity became something more than a word. As a Melbourneite, where everything has been heightened because of the second wave of infections, what have your on-the-ground observations been?
Wow. Yeah, it's been a pretty amazing year, hasn't it? A really extraordinary year in so many ways. So I guess just like personal reflections, and just going out for a walk this morning, reflecting on this also, that the first thing I guess is just everyone's wearing masks, which never happened, was never ever a thing in Australia, but now in Melbourne we take it for granted. Everyone walks around with a mask on, so that's an observation. Sense of space has really shrunk, I guess. Like, we've all had to stay within the 5 kilometre sort of zone around our individual dwellings, so a lot of people walking, less traffic on the road. The city feels less less active, less busy. Another thing, and sort of getting a sense of this and talking to cafe owners and these kinds of things, that economic activity has slowed right down. There's a lot of where I live in the west of Melbourne, there's a lot of shop fronts that are now empty and for lease, so a lot of businesses have actually shut their doors. Premises are empty. The hospitality sector has just taken a massive hit, as everybody knows. So yeah, I guess those are some of the just kind of daily reflections as I just go for a walk, and what I see and what I've observed.
So you've recently conducted a pandemic gardening national survey with results collated from responses from over 9,000 Australians. That is a really impressive number of responses. What did it tell you about the evolution of our gardening habits during the pandemic?
Yes, so that's I'm really glad that we've got this opportunity to talk about this, Suzanne, and I'm going to try and share with you now and the people watching a little bit of an overview of the survey. So just see if this actually works. Are you seeing my screen now?
I am, yes.
Yeah. So you can see that's actually our urban farmer, Claire, in one of Melbourne's newest urban above ground farms in Alphington at the Melbourne Food Hub, which my organisation Sustain established with a grant from the Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation. So just for people who don't know, haven't been to Melbourne, this was an old rubbish dump originally, and then it was capped, and where she's standing was just bare dirt back in 2018 when we commenced this initiative, and now it's as you can see, a thriving and abundant urban farm on 500 square meters in a metro Melbourne. And I guess that's just kind of anticipating a future question. That's kind of our vision for what we would like to see across Australia. We talk about the future of food in Australia as being about making Australian towns and cities edible, and having as many spaces brought into production like this, providing jobs and employment opportunities, business opportunities, as it is for Claire, and providing fresh, healthy food for local residents. So that's our vision of what the future can be and should be for Australia. So yes, the question of the survey. So this is just a little kind of very high level overview of our findings. As you mentioned, there were over 9,000 responses. We ran this from June to July in 2020, and it was really motivated by A couple of things. One was when the first kind of lockdown happened in the first wave of the pandemic, we were getting reports that a lot of people were being told they couldn't access community gardens, and so we knew from our experience and the groups that we work with, the networks that we support, like Community Gardens Australia, the peak body for the estimated 1,300 community gardens across Australia, that community gardens are very, very important for for the gardeners, for those who participate and volunteer and attend them, and that they really should be regarded as essential services. And so people being prohibited from accessing community gardens during the lockdown was a matter of concern for us. And so we wanted to really make the case about how important access to these places and similar places are. And also the media was talking about, nurseries running out of seeds and seedlings, and people being, at home, spending more time at home, spending more time in the garden, taking up gardening for the first time. And so we wanted to get a bit of an insight into what was going on and what gardening actually meant for people. So that was the kind of the background and the motivation. And this is what we found. So these are our kind of high level findings. Respondents told us that the pandemic had, everyone would have gleaned from media and just kind of watching what's going on in the country and the world at the moment, that this has been a time of great disruption. But many people also set a time for great reflection, and a great many people feeling that the potential for transformative change is much closer than it has been for a very long time. A frequently recurring theme was the increased sense of time that many respondents reported, leading to more, and for many people, much more time in their gardens. Thirdly, that edible gardening makes a major difference to people's sense of mental health and well-being, and that's hugely significant. And I was researching this just in the past week, that apparently in Australia, the other pandemic, or one of the other pandemics we're experiencing, is mental illness. And that's actually costing the country, in direct costs and indirect costs, an estimated $180 billion a year, which is just an extraordinary sum, as well as all the individual suffering and family suffering that mental illness causes. So one of the major reasons why we are calling for a huge investment and expansion of edible gardening and urban agriculture. So fourthly, for many respondents, it allowed them to maintain social connections, and in several cases, establish new connections. Next, for those on low incomes, edible gardening is much more than a hobby. It makes a major contribution to their household food budgets. So 45% of those growing more than 30% of their own food in our survey had household incomes of under $50,000, which is the poverty line in Australia for a family of four. And finally, while 98% of respondents want to continue and or expand their food growing activities, more than a quarter, so they need help to do so, with access to advice and mentoring being the most frequently supported need. So those were the high level findings. Then we had a number of themes emerging through over 25,000 individual comments. So there was just, this survey was really an outpouring of perspectives and stories and experience, and it's just a massive, huge, data source and insight into the lives of so many people across the country at this time. It's quite extraordinary and moving. So some of the key themes that came through in these comments were great concern about noticeable trends towards increasing inequality and hardship, especially for vulnerable and marginalised members of the Australian and global communities. And so while for many respondents this has caused considerable anxiety about the future, and that of course is overlaid with already increased concern and existential concerns about the climate emergency and biodiversity loss and related crises that we're facing, this sentiment was also balanced by large numbers of other respondents who noted the many positives to emerge from the pandemic, in particular increased community connectedness, a deeper appreciation of what really matters in life, and greater awareness of the urgent need for change. As I said, 9,140 responses. We were completely blown away by that number. Just an extraordinary, as I said, outpouring of perspectives and sharing, and it was really touching to have comments like these. People really appreciating the effort that we'd gone to actually do this as this gentleman from Adelaide said, I'm so glad someone is recording this awakening. I feel that gardening keeps me in touch with the basics of our existence. It reminds me that the complexities of life can sometimes just require observation and interaction. It reminds me that the graciousness of life is abundant. These are qualities learnt in a garden. So lots of comments like that, really, very touching and moving sentiments. So look, just quickly, who were the people that completed the survey? Overwhelmingly, they were people over 45, as you can see there, although we did have a smaller number of younger people, and about, just over a quarter of respondents under the age of 45. In terms of the ethnic and cultural backgrounds, broadly reflective of the diversity of Australia as an immigrant country. And we were also pleased to note that over 2% of respondents identified as Indigenous Australians, First Nation Australians. So it was great to be able to capture their perspectives in this. What was significant, and I've touched on this already in relation to food security and the importance of food growing for people on low incomes, is that in terms of the income profile, the majority of respondents had a lower than average household income. So the average household income in Australia is actually $117,000. That's the national census from 2017-18. So more than 70% of our respondents had household incomes less than that figure. And fully a quarter, as I mentioned, reported a household income below $50,000, which is that poverty line for a family of four. Overwhelmingly female respondents, 77%, as you can see there. So not clear from that as to whether Australian gardeners are predominantly, mainly female, but it is worth noting that globally, the majority of the people who grow the world's food, as opposed to food that people eat rather than food that's traded on the commodity world trade, are women. Small farmers, Indigenous farmers do tend to be women. So in that sense, if the majority of Australian gardeners are women, they would be reflective of the global picture. So this is the geographic dispersal. Over nearly 30% of Australia's total landmass was represented by respondents to this survey. And you can see there, while the bulk of the respondents were clustered, as you'd expect, around the major cities and urban areas, there was good representation from regional areas as well as remote and rural communities as well. And you can see there the breakdown across the states and territories. And if we look at Sydney, for example, you can see there, or New South Wales rather, a significant number of respondents around Canberra and up and down the north and central and north coast of New South Wales. And then in Sydney, you can see the fairly wide dispersal across the city as a whole. All right, so just looking then at what people were growing, how much they were growing, where they were growing, what they were doing with it, those kind of questions. So the bulk of the respondents, more than 50%, were what we would term as experienced gardeners, long-term gardeners, been doing it for more than 10 years and more than a third doing it for over 20 years. But we had this segment, as you can see up there, of new gardeners and since COVID gardeners. So 4% of respondents took it up since the pandemic, since March this year, and a further 5% had been gardening for less than 1 year. So, quite a significant number of new and inexperienced gardeners. In terms of how much food people are growing, you can see there around 50% saying they're growing, a little, less than 10% of their own food. But then significantly, more than a third of respondents are growing some of their own food, so between 10 and 30%, which is, a fair bit actually when you think about it. And then you've got a significant number, 14%, who are growing a lot, more than 30% of their own food. And some of those people are growing, as they told us, sometimes like 70, 80% of their own vegetables. You've got some very self-sufficient gardeners, very serious gardeners amongst these respondents. This is important in terms of thinking about nutritional health and dietary health, which is another, pandemic we're experiencing in Australia. What we eat is now the major cause of, morbidity, disease, and early death in Australia. Unfortunately, it's overtaken tobacco and alcohol as the leading population health challenge in the country. So you see there, and we're constantly told by health professionals that we're not eating enough fruit and veg. What's the answer to that? Grow some of your own food. As you can see there, what people are growing overwhelmingly is fruit and vegetables. And if you look at what they're growing in terms of vegetables, this is it. It's leafy greens. It's the vitamin-rich, nutritionally dense food that people are growing. Leafy greens, herbs, legumes, root crops, aromatics, and fruiting vegetables, as well as significant amounts of fruit. Wanting to, obviously there's a lot more kind of detail here, and we have got a longer webinar which people can view online, where myself and my colleague Kelly Janati go through this in more detail. So I'm sort of skimming over some of the details today in the interest of time, but just to give you a bit of a high-level snapshot for your viewers and listeners. You can see there in terms of the impact the pandemic has had on respondents. It has made people anxious and worried. Unsurprisingly, it has made people feel isolated and alone. It has caused economic impacts in terms of loss in work and income. But conversely, 27% of people say their physical health has actually improved, which is an interesting finding, we think. Then if in terms of looking at the qualitative analysis and comments, one of the things that came through, as we said before, is that people said they had a lot of time. We had thousands of comments about people saying how much more time they had, and then that correlated to have people reporting feeling happier actually, and less stressed because they had that expanded sense of time. Although for some people, their work intensified. You can see that reflected in some comments like this, where this lady from Bowral is saying, the pandemic has been positive for our family's mental and physical health. Having a large garden has meant we all spend more time together and with purpose. And this lady from Castlemaine in Victoria says, my hours of work are now reduced and I work from home. Although there's less money, we are happier and healthier. I walk more every day through the forest. I have more time to spend on my creative activities, including gardening and art. So you can get a bit of a glimpse there of how different life could be for lots of people if we weren't spending so much time as we have been in recent decades in work. Better work-life balance is what a lot of people said. So, did the pandemic lead to more edible gardening? Absolutely. Yes, it did. You can see there 25% say they spent a lot more time in the garden, and then a further 37% saying they spent a bit more time in the garden, with only 3% saying their gardening activities reduced. In terms of how important gardening was, massively important is the message. You can see there nearly a fifth of respondents saying pretty much it was almost a matter of survival, certainly in terms of mental health, that they could not have made it through the pandemic without their garden, without access to that space. And then a further 3/5 saying that it was extreme, it was very important that being able to garden during this time meant a great deal to them. And that correlates then, and this is one of the main findings and messages of this research, into the link between edible gardening, urban agriculture, and mental health. And so 72% of all respondents said that gardening greatly or significantly improved their mental health, with only 3% saying that it made a little difference to them. And interestingly, from an age perspective, the group that most strongly expressed the link between gardening and mental health was the 18 to 24 age bracket. So 53% of respondents in that age group said that gardening greatly improved their mental health, compared to 38% overall. And that was the same group, though young people, who reported the greatest increase in time spent gardening during the pandemic. 37% of 18 to 24-year-olds significantly increased their time gardening, compared to 25% of all gardeners. So you see there, some of the observations and personal reflections of respondents. The woman who's only been gardening for a year from Geelong saying that her mother passed away in March, and watching things grow, helping them into the world has been enormously comforting. In a year where things feel like they've been on pause, the inexorable growth of our vegetables has been a sweet and quiet lesson in motion, a sense of things carrying on. Yeah, we had lots of comments kind of reinforcing this message, helping people reduce their stress and anxiety, both physical ailments, disabilities, as well as mental ailments. That comment on the right there, the lady from Melbourne saying, "My garden is my church." For a woman with a history of mental health challenges and supporting a family and husband with terminal cancer in his early 50s, my garden has been my way back to a happy, healthy state of mind. I'm back. So many really touching and moving comments like this. As you can see there, from far north Queensland, this lady says, "My autistic son loves the garden. It's his happy place." In terms of cancer, a lot of people talking about cancer and gardening. That lady from the ACT saying, "I have cancer. My garden keeps me alive, especially on the bad days. My greatest joy is seeing my grandchildren fossick through it, eating as they go. For me, keeping the garden going in times of stress is a way of asserting some control in my life, of establishing and maintaining some normality while the world spins out of control." Also, a lot of people commented here on PTSD and the gardening being a balm for my soul, as that Indigenous Australian from regional Victoria comments there. The link of the idea of gardening as therapeutic and healing is a really powerful message. Those were like really some main findings, I guess. So just in terms of what this means, and there's a lot more. It's a huge survey, but I'll just pause there. I don't know if you want to ask any questions at this point, Suzanne, before I actually go on to talk about what's the significance of this and what we're actually calling for in terms of a policy agenda and recommendations for change.
It's actually blown me away. There's a lot of incredibly important, statistically relevant data there, because you've got such enormous numbers involved in it. One of the things that particularly struck me was the effect that it had on mental health and the opportunities there for youth and mental health. And gardening was something that had not crossed my mind. There's a lot of really important data there, and I have to congratulate you on putting that together, because I sincerely doubt that we have anything like that in Australia at this point in time. I definitely like to, my area of interest is definitely, with all of this data, what have you determined are the key things to lobby for at this point?
Okay. All right. Well, that's exactly what we're going to be talking about, and what we're going to be presenting to an audience of over 100 people on Friday this week, many of whom will be from local government and state government. So absolutely, the whole point of doing this is to make the case for greater support. This is something that tens of thousands of Australians are already doing. There's research from the Australia Institute a few years ago that actually tried to get a snapshot of how many Australians are actually growing some of their own food. And their finding was, I think this was 2014, was that over half of Australians at that point were growing or raising some of their own food. So, a lot of us are already doing it, but we're doing it particularly with community gardens and doing it in a sort of community sense and collective sense. We're doing it largely as volunteers, bootstrapping it ourselves through our own funding, with a lot of obstacles, a lot of barriers, and really a lack of comprehensive support. So, fundamentally, the case we're making is, as I've, attempted to show you through what I've presented already, that this activity is hugely beneficial. It's hugely multifunctional. And it really should be seen as, by governments at all levels, federal, state, territory, and local, as an investment in population health, in health and well-being, flourishing individuals, flourishing families, healthy communities, and healthy biodiversity, and climate change mitigation and adaptation and resilience. That's what we're saying. And we're calling, for an investment. I mean, our fundamental call for this is the creation of a national edible gardening fund, which we're putting a price tag on of $500 million. Which sounds like a lot, but as I mentioned, just the mental health costs alone for this country are up, approaching $200 billion a year. So it's a tiny fraction, 1/4 of 1% of what it's costing us as a country just in mental illness. If you look at diseases, chronic disease related to diet, that's another, somewhere $11-15 billion every year, and that figure's going up and up and up every year. We only spend 1.34% of our annual health budget on prevention. That's about $2 billion a year. That places us 16th globally out of rich countries in the world, half of the expenditure of the United States, of Canada, New Zealand, and the UK in terms of spending on preventative healthcare. So we're saying that 500 million would only be, a quarter, an increase of a quarter in that, very small percentage that we're spending on preventative health at the moment. So that's what that's the headline. That's what we're calling for. But I can just show you now how we break that down and what we're actually, the other things, the other kind of like policy changes that we're actually wanting to lay out as what we call our roadmap for transformation and a healthy and flourishing food future for Australia for this generation and future generations. So those are the this is based on the survey respondents, based on the the messages and recommendations that came through from these 9,000 respondents, as well as our own kind of knowledge and expertise, and those of the our partner organisations with whom we work with on urban food and urban agriculture in Australia. So across those 6 pillars, urban planning and land use, capacity building, training, education, information, resource sharing, mentoring, guidance, finance, subsidies and incentives, and that's where that $500 billion fund comes in, infrastructure and materials, policies and plans, and governance and coordination. So that's the 6 pillars of our roadmap for transformation. So in terms of breaking that down a bit further, I should say also that what we're saying is there needs to be. Sorry, I'll just go back. So that's an important point that I want to say, which I skipped over. So we are saying there needs to be a cultural shift. So to actually achieve this agenda, we're saying there needs to be a big shift in culture and values at the political level in Australia. We need our elected leaders and policymakers at all levels of government to be doing everything they can to create a healthy and sustainable food system for all Australians. That means embracing the movement to regenerative agriculture, which Charles Massey has championed so passionately for the past 4 years. And some of your viewers may have seen the Australian Story featuring Charles Massey and his family, as well as leading regenerative farmers such as the Haggertys in WA last week. Also means controlling the expansion of the fast food industry and controlling the marketing of unhealthy food and beverage products to children and youth. It means empowering individuals and communities to grow more of their own food. And it means critically embedding all of this and more in long-term food system strategies and plans that are created and implemented through inclusive, participatory and collaborative mechanisms. So going into a bit more of the detail, so urban planning and land use, that means embedding edible gardening and urban agriculture as key priorities in state, local and territory planning schemes, supported by clear targets for increasing urban food production. In terms of capacity building, we're saying skills development, training, mentoring and knowledge transfer for and between institutions, communities and individuals, covering practical, social and organisational dimensions of urban food production. Thirdly, in relation to finance, a long-term commitment to appropriate resourcing of edible gardening and urban agriculture at federal, state, territory and local government levels. So that is the $500 million National Edible Gardening Fund. That is our headline call to action for our policymakers, and it's appropriate that we're recording this on the day that the federal budget is being handed down. Because we would say this is an opportunity. That $500 million, by the way, we're saying should be co-financed. We're saying 50% from the federal government and the balance to come from state and territory governments according to their, their tax base, their resourcing capacity and population. We're not saying it should come from local government, as they have a much smaller fiscal base than state, federal and territory governments. In terms of infrastructure, this would come again through that fund. We're roughly saying about $35–40 million as an infrastructure fund that would be devolved and managed cooperatively between local government and community groups and organisations as a pool of materials and infrastructure to establish and maintain diverse forms of urban food production. Next, in terms of the policies and plans, this has to be embedded institutionally. There have to be long-term commitments. So we need the institutionalization in a policy and program sense at all levels of government in the form of edible gardening, food security, food system plans and strategies such as those that are already being developed in Victoria, where we're based. The City of Greater Bendigo this year adopted its first food system strategy. Cardinia Shire Council a couple of years ago adopted a community food strategy. Moreland in inner Melbourne adopted a food system strategy in 2017. So these are the kinds of things that are being already done by local government. It needs to happen now at territory, state and federal level. And finally, there needs to be governance, participatory, transparent, inclusive, democratic governance frameworks, coordination frameworks that are multi-stakeholder, that are about collaboration and cooperation to really coordinate this scaling up and expansion of urban food production across Australia. So I have got sort of like more specific breakdowns of each of those. I don't know if you want me to speak to those or if that's enough for the purpose of your audience. Let me know.
No, look, I think that's a lot of really useful information, but it would be good if perhaps we can have a link to it, or if they go to your Sustain website, would there be a link to that there? I would like to.
So we'll be presenting this. Yeah, we'll be presenting this on Friday, as I said, Suzanne. So yeah, the next sort of 6 slides of this presentation actually go through each of those 6 pillars, and there's about 4 specific sort of action items and agendas across each of those. So that will be available as a recorded. People obviously can come along on Friday, and we hope they do. But later, the next probably towards the back end of next week, we'll have that available on our YouTube channel as a recorded webinar that people can go and watch. So you'll be able to link to that, and then we will be putting this all into a report that will be on our website. That will be available around mid-November this year. That will capture this action agenda.
It's a very, very valid agenda, and certainly wish you the very best of luck with it. It's really important. What are the biggest stumbling blocks that you anticipate?
So one of them, I mean, we're talking about like urban planning and land use, for example, and unlocking land. So that's really about enabling access to land for people to grow more food. And this is, talk about like a cultural shift. This needs to happen inside government departments and the minds of planners and how they're educated and understand the value of these activities. Because at the moment, most of them don't, and they take a very risk-averse culture, and they think about the problems, and they think about, people falling over on fruit, and they think about, I think they've been, and I say this as someone who used to be a lawyer, so I'm not, not just having a go at lawyers and insurance industry on an uninformed basis. And of course, they do important work in our society, and I'm not in any way saying that their work isn't valuable, but I think there's I think we have become a bit fearful, and there's a culture of kind of like risk aversion and worries about insurance and litigation that really stops us from doing things that we really need to be doing. If we think about, what's the big picture here? Well, the big picture here is that our children have, my children who are in their teens, statistically will live less years than me because of diet. That's a shocking legacy as a country, that the current generation has reduced life expectancy because of the food we're eating. We need we need to change the culture around what we're eating. At the moment in our cities and towns, what we see as normal is fast food franchises. The convenience culture, the cheap food, the empty calories, all the rest of it, it's making us sick. Environmentally, it's a very destructive industry. You can see what's happening in the Amazon. I could talk about deforestation in North Queensland, the links with climate change and biodiversity loss. It's all there, it's all documented. And in terms of our bodies and our health, it's not good. It makes us sick. But that's what's normal. That's what the planning schemes have enabled and facilitated in our towns and suburbs, like a massive expansion of this industry. There's research from Deakin University came out this year that talks about Melbourne as being a food swamp. What they mean by that is that our suburbs, and particularly low income suburbs, statistically, are saturated by this industry, by fast food industry. In Cardinia Shire, this graphic behind me is our work with Cardinia Shire Council, the growth area of Melbourne, 50 kilometres from the CBD. For every healthy food outlet, and that includes the supermarkets, and I could talk about the supermarkets and the kinds of foods that they're promoting as well. But they're classified as healthy, or greengrocers, I guess. For every one of those, there are 9 unhealthy food outlets, 9 fast food outlets. That ratio has doubled in the last 5 years, right? So that's what they mean by swamp, the saturation of the retail and built food environment with unhealthy food outlets. That is what is normal, and that is the environment in which our children are growing up. You combine that with the completely uncontrolled expansion of marketing and sponsorship of sport. So I'm of a generation where I remember, going to the WACA. I grew up in Perth. I went to the WACA, watching, World Series cricket, the one-day cups and those things in the late 1970s, early 1980s, and it was the Benson and Hedges World Cup in those days. It was tobacco, it was cigarettes that were sponsoring sport. Those days are behind us, and we'd be horrified to think that, tobacco could be an industry that would be associated with sport, seem offensive to common sense. But what's replaced it? We're in the AFL season right now, and it's McDonald's. It's fast food. So this is an industry that's expanded massively. We know what the outcomes are in terms of population health. We need to make our towns and cities edible. We need to shift what's normal from, fast food mall strips to, community gardens, to community orchards, to edible spaces, front yard gardens. We need to see fresh food growing in as many places as possible. But to do that, we need our planners to understand these links and to get over this roadblock, which is their risk aversion and that voice in their ear that's the insurance company saying, oh, your premium's going to go up if you do this, or our community gardens are just a kind of like a group of people that are, wanting to appropriate public land for their own benefit. We have to reframe the debate and the discussion and say, no, this survey and other research like it shows, the extreme, the huge importance that these kinds of activities have for our mental health and well-being, have for food security, particularly for low-income households, have for dietary diversity and health and well-being generally, have for bringing communities together, for all the things that we know we need, particularly in the time of the pandemic and the climate emergency. It's just the right thing to be doing, and planners, the managers of land, need to make that land available, and they do that in Europe. In Europe, they have allotments, and in Germany, every new housing development has to have food incorporated in it. So if people are living in apartments, they're going to have access to outside space because they know it's important for connection to nature and people to be able to grow some of their own food. Like that's a big roadblock in Australia. Like we just haven't. There's lots of kind of in terms of urban planning, it's been driven by a development industry that really is about it's about short-term economic interests, maximizing yield, maximizing return in the real estate market, and just not taking into account long-term health and well-being impacts, population health, biodiversity, climate change resilience. This is the shift. That's the big shift that needs to happen culturally. And it's a generational challenge, and even an evolutionary challenge in some ways. So we need to go from a political and economic paradigm that's about just looking at short-term balance sheets and 6-monthly returns, to say actually we can't eat money. At the end of the day, money's not going to feed us. We need healthy food. We're creatures of nature. We live in a planet that's about life and about ecosystems. We're part of that. We depend on that. If we go around wiping out, insects and pollinators and birds and animals, we will go with them. It's time to actually stop and say, prioritize this, make this the highest priorities of our planning frameworks, of our policies, and ultimately of our economy. And that's the shift that needs to happen. So, there's a whole lot of detail in that, but that I think captures it.
Sorry, I lost my mute button. There's obviously a rather large cultural shift that needs to happen, and we are obviously a fair bit behind some other countries. For those that do understand the importance of this and that want to be part of the groundswell that gets this movement happening, what's your advice to them? How do people actually get involved, both agribusinesses and individuals, and help make this happen?
Yeah, great question. So I guess that's one of the reasons I really enjoy and love working in this area, and it's it inspires me because there's so many ways for people to get involved, and start, if you're not already, by growing some of your own food. That's the thing that you don't need anybody's permission. If you've even if you're in an apartment, you've got a little bit of space, you can grow your own food. Even if you don't have space outside, you can do things inside. You can grow microgreens and sprouts. You can grow mushrooms. Check it out. People are doing that, growing mushrooms under their sink even. So empower yourself. Check out what's going on online, and start embracing growing some of your own food. First thing. Second thing is connect with others. You can do it online, lots of kind of groups, lots of networks, but physical connection is very important as well. Join a group, find out where your nearest community garden group is, or local food network, or whatever it might be that's close to you. If there isn't one and you've got people who feel the same way, start one. Get involved. This is going to happen through individuals making change, but the kinds of changes that we're talking about require collective, sustained, organised movement building, and that's ultimately where we're going, what we're about. So it's about building that kind of collective capacity. So if you are involved in a community garden, join the Community Gardens Australia network, the peak body for community gardening in Australia. Affiliate with them, support them, get involved. Do things like attend the the conference that the RDA ACT are putting on over the next 18 months. Check out the work that we're doing with the Urban Agriculture Forum, uaf.org.au. We're doing the 3rd National Urban Agriculture Forum, Care Farming and Gardening in the Climate Emergency. Soon we'll be releasing a program of webinars and speakers and events from Australia and internationally that will expose you to the latest research and practice, and also networking opportunities to connect with people in your local region, around the country, internationally, and and really get inspired and motivated to become more involved. And then also in April next year, we are organising for the first time a National Urban Agriculture Month. So that's an open invitation to individuals and organisations around the country to organise your own event, to have your own, community garden tour or working bee or workshop or film screening or speaker event or whatever it might be. And to put that up on the Urban Agriculture Forum website, the Urban Agriculture Month, profile that. We'll be having a calendar of events, a map around the country to really make visible the extent of these activities and just who's involved and what they're doing. Right now, actually, Grow It Local, which is one of the promotional partners for our event, they've got a spring festival nationally. The Grow It Local Spring Festival is a similar kind of national level event that is really celebrating us gardeners across Australia who are growing some of their own food, and you can go and check that out again for networking, connection, inspiration. And then yes, in terms of like supporting the big shift, I mean, if we if we look at this fight, even if we're able to get like a fifth of what we're asking for, we'd be talking about thousands of new jobs. We'd be talking about supporting thousands of schools across the country, a huge level of coordination. It would really, boost this movement in a massive way. So we will be, in the wake of the webinar on Friday and our report in November, we'll be looking to organise a petition, an online campaign, and we'll be inviting people to endorse that and sign that and to add their voices and names, to this agenda that we feel is so important and so necessary for a healthy and sustainable and resilient food future for all of us, for our generation and future generations.
It's a lot of really good advice, and Food in the Capital, RDA, ACT are behind you 100%. I think it's absolutely brilliant, and we fully support and congratulate you on everything that you've done. A final, last but definitely not least, talking about congratulations. You won a grant under Australia's Ethical's 2020 Community Grants. So what opportunities is that going to present to Sustain?
So as you remember, the very first image I showed you of our urban farmer Claire at the urban farm in Alphington, and the transformation of a bare patch of dirt and ex-rubbish dump into a thriving urban farm. So that's what we want to use that funding from Australian Ethical for, to work with the City of Darebin and our local emergency food security agency, Bridge Darebin, who do vocational training programs. We've been working on a curriculum, an introductory curriculum to edible food, edible gardening and urban agriculture. So a combination of vocational training for youth with high needs, and the infrastructure and coordination required to find a vacant site that we can use, even if it's only temporary for a couple of years, to transform into a thriving, productive, inspiring place where youth can be trained, where volunteers can come and work together and grow food. And can be another kind of seed of inspiration for similar initiatives across Melbourne and across the country.
Well, congratulations, and thank you very much for your time today. It's been incredibly interesting. I strongly urge all our viewers to go to the Sustain website and please have a look at more, get involved, and we look forward to hearing a lot more from you. Thank you so much, Nick.
Yeah, thanks, Suzanne. Just finally, if you do like what I've said today and support our work, we are a membership-based organisation. We're trying to build our capacity through growing a membership. It strengthens our voice. It shows that people support us. All our members have free access to our webinars and discounts to our events. So you can become a member of Sustain for as little as $35 a year. Either as an individual or as a community group or business or organisation. So please consider supporting our work concretely and materially by becoming a member.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks very much, Suzanne. Thank you.